This. Okay. Hello, people. Hello. As per usual, bathrooms all the way around. Doors are unlocked. Don't go this way. You'll get locked out. And then you'll. This is React Denver for everyone since you've all been here before. Lot more food. I ordered for 10. There's not 10 here. Almost.
We can eat for 10.
Maybe. Our own Wills finally graced us with a presentation that he promised me over a half a year ago. Yep. I'll call him out. I'm working on one for next month, but I have yet to decide if we're going to do a December meetup. I'll post that as a poll on Discord. Everyone can vote. I'm working on a deeper dive into hooks, like how hooks actually work, and not just this is state, this is a memo, what is memoization? Now, like, where do hooks actually live in the code base and whatnot? I've been teaching hooks to some of my students, and I'm like, there's more than effect and state. So, anywho, Will's up, eat dinner.
Awesome.
Go
All right, I'll share my screen. We'll get going. Have some fun. Love the. I love this group. I remember we had this many people when we started out. I actually was really kind of sad when it got so big. It was like hard to talk to everybody. So this is really nice. Let me share my screen. All right. Share sound too. Cool. All right. Make sure I turn off my audio. No echo. Am I getting an echo? All right, so 1 second. I've had this issue with Zoom before where I'll mute myself and I'll mute my audio, and then I'm hearing.
It
has to do. I think it has to do with screen sharing. So. See if I can figure it out.
Does this one have a mic on it?
All right.
Okay.
All right. So I think it's okay. All right. There's this weird thing where, yeah, for some reason it like Mac OS disobeys that I've muted it, and I'm like hearing my speakers, and it's really just like, no, don't do that. Don't do that. Okay. Cool. So I don't know who looked at the website and actually saw what the talk was. Did anyone actually come here for this specific talk, or did you just come to this meetup? Oh, awesome. Cool. I mean, I see a couple of people that just like come usually, so it's great that you were interested in this actual topic. I forget what I actually wrote on the description, but I will talk about selects and dropdowns and combo boxes and autocompletes, and I've done some things with that several times over the years. But when I think about this topic and I think about what's involved, I realize that really that topic is kind of a Trojan horse for accessibility. So I don't know if anyone was expecting that, but that's going to sort of coming along for the ride. I realized as I really geeked out with combo boxes and drop downs, particularly earlier this year in the spring, that there was a lot with accessibility that I had to learn. Some things I had learned over the years, but then like when I really sat down with combo box and really got into the weeds about what's the right way to do this, it started to crystallize for me. I started to really take all this stuff that I heard about with ARIA tags and this and that, and it started to actually like click, and it started to make more sense. And I realized that it took me a while to get to this point where I understood things a little bit better. And this whole talk is a bit of an attempt to sort of take that crystallization take that like sort of TLDR, how to get started. Here's how to think about these things so they actually make sense. I'm going to try to convey that in the next like 30 or so minutes. All right, so I want to poll everyone. We all develop different things, but whether you're building applications or you're building components specifically, who here has gotten to spend time working on a UI component that wasn't just ready to go off the shelf, that you had to really go in and tinker, build maybe from scratch or extend something that already existed? Who's had some like more than a few days of time really working on a component? All right, I see one hand out of like 8 of us. So that's cool. And that's two. All right, thank you. Yeah. So if you didn't raise your hand, which is most of us, good news, you will probably do that at some point. If you're building web UI, and if you're at the React meetup and you're trying to brush up on your React, you're probably building some web UI. It's only a matter of time before you come across a certain need and you need a component that doesn't just already exist. And it might be a certain date picker. Like let's say you're building scheduling apps, and guess what? That's a really rich date picker that you need to work a certain way, and it's not just going to be ready to go. Combobox is actually a pretty common one where you need a certain type of search field or a way of selecting something. And there's a few things that are out there that I absolutely encourage you to use, but you're likely to run up against the edge cases of what is available already. And you may find yourself building with it. Even if you don't build a combo box, I found that working with a combo box, you kind of like get into things and see a lot of things that apply to other components. And so we're going to talk about that. All right, so let's talk about a little bit about accessibility. Who here has had to set a tab index on the HTML element? All right, that's more like half of us, closer to half of us. That's more of us. Okay, cool. Not everyone, though. Does anyone know what that does? Can anyone say what that does?
I'll take a guess.
Yeah.
The order in which, when you hit tab, it'll cycle through on the screen.
Yeah, so it has to do when you hit tab, it affects what you will visit.
And it's also like a big deal for accessibility when you're trying to figure out like when like an iOS or something, you're like having to do like triple tap or whatever to get it.
Yeah, it's a big deal for accessibility. I'll just say real quick, what values should you be using? Actually, I'm gonna go back to a question on this. What values should you be using if you need to do something with tab index?
Integers? Integers?
Integers, yep, numbers. What specific values are most pertinent? Does anybody know what -1 does?
Turns it off.
Turns it off, hides it from the tab order. Is that a good idea or a bad idea?
Depends on if you hate your users.
Depends on you hate your users. It depends on whether you want something to be visitable. And you might not want something to be visible. You might want to hide something from the tab order that would normally be in the tab order. We're going to talk about that. I'll say a little bit more. 0 usually just says, hey, this is tabbable. And sometimes you're setting that on something like maybe a span or a div that you want to be tabbable and focusable that normally wouldn't be. And if you don't, you shouldn't be using 1 and up, because then you start to interfere with the natural tab order, and that's where you start to get into trouble. Okay, more questions. Who has set an ARIA attribute on an HTML element? All right, same people, cool. Let's see, yep. Who set a role? All right, one less person. Maybe you have, yeah, okay. All right.
Wow.
So that's a lot like ARIA, but a little bit different. Okay, who has spent time testing keyboard navigation? Make sure that works. All right, 3 of us. So one different hand that wasn't raised. Funny thing about keyboard navigation, this was actually a placeholder slide in the slide tool I'm using, and I'm gonna test something here. I was looking at this earlier. So if I hover on these there's this little like, let me make this a little bit bigger. There's a little toolbar in the bottom, not that big. And if I tab, my focus is on this learn more here. And then if I tab again, where did it go?
Disappeared. Well, is it to your mouse?
Yeah, it's maybe here, but my mouse is there. If I tab again, where is it? I don't know. Again, I don't know. Again, I don't know. Oh, I hit space to activate a button that I was actually on. So this is an interesting thing. Like, this is getting a little bit into accessibility, but not just, I mean, this is, by the way, this is for everybody. This I say accessibility. This is a good example of where accessibility is for everybody. Where is my tab focus? I'm sighted, I can see things. I'm not using a screen reader, but I didn't know where my focus was, and it was on this little thing here. And if I keep tabbing, I think it came back around, and there's a couple places where, oh, there it is. It's showing up on this little thing here. This is a funny little bit that if you're not intentional about it, if you don't have a designer thinking about this, you might not implement it, and you might have these elements that have no focus rings, and you don't know where you even are. I was lost doing this. I came across this slide. I went to delete it. I'm like, what is the keyboard behavior? How is the keyboard interaction on this tool? This is built by a bunch of really good developers that know what they're doing, and it was overlooked. And I think that's kind of common, unfortunately. Who here is tested with a screen reader? All right, I got this 4 or 5 hands, not half of us. And I think that's pretty typical. And I want to sort of be a bit honest here and admit, I think we in this industry, we're a bit not where we want to be with our skills, understanding these things that I'm talking about, understanding what it means to have working keyboard navigation, focus indicators, what a screen reader experience is like to use, and to develop for. I went through most of my career not thinking about this, not doing anything of it, not doing anything with it. And there was a lot of times where I didn't need to. I had components provided to me that handled that. Or I had somebody on my team that knew how that worked, and would test that and say, hey, let's just add this here. And we'd do it and it would be fine. So I wouldn't say that we're building bad things, but we're kind of fumbling around in the dark on this. And I think we can level up pretty quickly and get much further ahead than where we are right now without much time. So I'm saying accessibility could definitely be better. And just a quick note here, I I care a lot about equal access to different things. And technology is, I think it goes without saying, it's fundamental to accessing so many things, accessing information, getting things we need. I'm using it constantly, and it's easy to think it just works for me, I'm fine. And then I started tabbing through something and it didn't quite work. And I would absolutely admit that there's been times where I've worked on a project and keyboard navigation was not working. And there were some very uncomfortable conversations about that. And one thing that I even would admit I suffered at was I would get asked, well, what would it take to fix this and improve this? And I couldn't give a good answer because I didn't really know. I really didn't understand all the different things that were entailed. Okay, so I had going back to selects now. The first UI component that I built was actually a jQuery plugin. It was in 2010. I was building a single page application with jQuery. That's not the worst part of it. Actually, that is the worst part of it. You don't want to build a single page application jQuery. I was working at an agency, so like making little carousels and interactive things, jQuery is great for and still is great for. But building a rich application in jQuery really didn't scale. Turned out this thing I'm going to talk about just a little bit, jQuery was fine for. I built a jQuery plugin where you could wire up a custom select. The application needed basically a table to show in the dropdown. And maybe this should have been a dialogue or a pop-up or something like that. But they wanted it to be a dropdown, and we actually built it and it worked pretty well. And I cut my teeth on going into the select element and seeing what I could style, what I couldn't style. Has anyone ever tried to style a select? Yeah? Was it easy?
No, there's certain parts of it you just can't change.
Yeah. There's certain parts you can't change. Yeah, it's you can't change a lot of it, like the parts that matter. On the surface, you can change like what you see initially, but then you open that dialog, and no, that's unstyled. It's a native element. You cannot style at all, and you might want to, and you're often going to get asked to, or you might get asked to. It's often required by UI designs. And I'll take a moment to say here, if you work at a bigger company or a company that's invested in a design system, that team, is really working with this stuff every day, and they're solving these things. And then, of course, there's component libraries that are out there on the web that you can use freely, including ones that are not styled, that are not opinionated about the style. Those are called headless components. And I strongly recommend reaching for those things and using those things. I like to point to Chakra. Chakra, I forget what their new libraries were called. I can't remember if it was ARC, but they've got headless components as well. MUI, I'm actually going to look at MUI today as an example. MUI does a pretty good job. They've got base UI, which is unstyled, not opinionated to material. Use those components as much as possible. And then when at some point you find something that doesn't quite work the way you need it to and you need it to be custom, that's what I'm going to talk about today, and hopefully give you some ideas of what to think about. Oh, this image, don't worry about this. I did not need that. I think I'm actually done with my slides. Cool. All right, so I've got a code sandbox I'm going to jump over to now. And I'm going to walk through, let me focus, let me make this about 50-50. All right, so we're going to walk through a couple HTML form elements and look at different ways to sort of implement accessibility. The first example I have here, it's this, sorry. Oh, I got to scroll up. There it is. Okay, cool. So I've got a couple text inputs just to start. And this first one, it's got no label element. It's actually got a span here. I threw a class label just to style it. But it's not really like a connected label. It's not thinking about whether, let me turn on screen reader and see what the experience looks like when I turn this on. I'm actually not exactly sure what to expect. I have a shortcut, and if you work with a Mac, if I press the power button 3 times, I can't remember if it's defaulted, but you can easily configure it to be enabled. Let's see if this comes through. I actually don't think it's playing. That's okay.
Shortcuts has keyboard focus. You are currently on a text element.
Okay, good. All right.
Chrome. React Denver example. Text input example. Edit text. You are currently on a text field inside of a frame. To enter text in this field, type. To exit this web area.
Interesting. I think it actually read text input example, which is good. I'm gonna tap
to everyone. Thumbs up. Text input example. Edit text. You are currently on a text field inside of a frame. To enter text in this field, type. To exit this web area, press Control, Option, Shift, up arrow.
Cool. So I'll stop there for a moment. I've got it set to verbose right now. So it's going to say a bunch of things because I don't really know what I'm doing with the screen reader. I want it to tell me what to do. And one nice thing is it's telling me how to work with the screen reader, how to navigate and how to do different things. I'm going to stop. VoiceOver off. Cool. I'm going to stop that for a moment. I'm going to go back to the HTML and point out a couple things. Now, I was actually surprised that it said text input example for this span because I didn't do anything to associate it. So I don't know if, I heard from a friend that VoiceOver is very predictive and it tries to it tries to give you as good an experience as possible in a very predictive way. So it might have some heuristics or some algorithmic things to look for the text preceding the field. Different screen readers will do things differently. Some will not try to guess like that and be as predictive. So I'm absolutely guessing that some other screen readers would not read the label for this input that does not have a label. So I had a span here for the first example. And then the next one, I added an ARIA label. So this is another way of adding a label. I'm not recommending this, but it's good to know it is available, and sometimes it is absolutely warranted. So this is where on the input, I added an ARIA label attribute, and then I had text example. The next example is akin to this, but different. And I like this one because it's using the label element. And the label element can have a 4, and then that 4 can reference the ID of the input. So this is corresponding to over here. And this is really, really recommended, really ideal, because then you have something that's visually, it's what what I visually see. I see the label, and it's tied to the field. And so a screen reader is going to see this, and it's going to know that those are connected. And so it can describe the input when it's focused for the user appropriately. Let's see what I want to say. What else do I want to say about this? I think that's good for now. Cool. So that's just some basic stuff with an input. Let's talk about select. So here's a basic select. Haven't done anything with it, not trying to do anything with it. It's just a simple select. I've used a label like I did with the input. I think I might actually have a redundant. Oh, I have a couple. I'm not going to talk about every little thing, but there's like a ARIA labeled by here, and that's actually referencing the ID on the label. So these are just little good examples of there's an interconnectedness between these different HTML elements. And I'm actually pointing the label to the input, and I'm pointing the input or the select back over to the label. And there's times when this is needed. There's times where this is optional. There's times where it can actually get in the way. But let me continue on to the style select. All right, so this starts to get more fun. So I just did some inline styles. I didn't want to worry about it, this or that. But I wanted to show this is where the style select, you can style that initial appearance, the initial appearance of what the user is seeing before it's expanded. But then you're getting that same native like pop-up, that gray background. And here's the options. It's not like stylable. And this is where I think MDN, what did MDN have to say about this? They have a styling with CSS section on the select, and it's as they say, the select element is notoriously difficult to style productively with CSS. It can affect certain elements, as you were saying. So that's very much the experience with that. Cool. So let's see. I think this might be a good time to actually inspect something called the accessibility tree. And I want to show you a couple things. Has anyone ever looked at the accessibility tree?
What?
The accessibility tree.
I just had to look up what an ARIA label was. So
Yeah. That's fine. So I usually don't need, I haven't actually had to use it much, but it's good to like point out a couple things. I'm going to do that right now. So let me just inspect this.
Accessibility tree?
Accessibility tree. I think there's so there's an accessibility tree similar to the DOM tree, and this is something that the browser has. Let's see. Okay, so sorry, I want this to be small. I could do it for either select. It doesn't matter which one. Click on this, and so I'm on the DOM view right here. So I'm looking at an elements, and you can see all the stuff I was already showing you in the code. So that's not too important. Nothing new there. Where'd it go? Where'd it go? Oh, I forget where it was because it's not in the tab here. It's over here where styles is. So there's an accessibility thing here. Let me make this a bit bigger. Display there. Okay. So this is the accessibility tree, and it's going to start where I focus things. Actually, no, it's showing everything. I think. Is it showing everything? I think it's showing it's starting where I focused. I inspected the select. That's where you're seeing Combobox here. And then so it's showing up the tree all the way to the root, and then it's showing down the tree, what's below it. So I want to point out, it's showing Combobox, not select. And that's because the select has a default role of Combobox. And it's defaulted on select, but we're going to need to set it on things when we build our own Combobox or look at a custom Combobox. But beneath it, we see something else that's nice to see. There's a menu list pop-up. So that's sort of like italicized and gray. There's no corresponding HTML element, but like structurally, in terms of the object model, that exists. There's a collection of things. And then the option elements, those are corresponding to menu items. So the option elements have a default role of menu item. So I'm starting to get into the language of these accessibility pieces that when you're using it, you don't need to think about these things. But if you think in terms of a screen reader, and it's trying to tell the user, hey, you're opening a menu. There are this many elements in this menu. You're on this menu item. This is selected or not selected. There's all these different aspects that need to be communicated verbally to vocally to somebody using a screen reader. Yeah, cool. Let's continue. All right, so from here, let's look at a. I was gonna show the Chakra example real quick. It's very similar to what I just did. This is Chakra if you haven't seen it. I remember going to Chakra, not just for its components, but for its underlying implementations. So if you're ever wondering, like, what's a good way to build things, their source code is very easy to read, very easy to follow, relatively easy to read and follow, I should say. Very accessible to me and very, I've learned a lot from looking through their source code of like, how did they solve this? How did they do this? Yeah, I don't think they have a Combobox. Actually, I was actually surprised they didn't. I actually want to build one using some of their other components, but they have a select, and it's just like what we talked about. We can inspect this. We're going to see a lot of the same things we just saw, where things are styled a certain way, but this isn't styled. These are just options. But to get richer from there, let's look at base UI. So this is material UI. There's you may not have known this, but there's a material UI part of MUI. And then there's Joy UI, and then there's base UI, there's MUI system. I could look at actually any of these, and we'd be looking at very much the same code. Doesn't really matter. I'm just going to look at base UI. And they have, they call it autocomplete. And this is basically a dropdown that, let me play with it, make it bigger. So click on it. It's got a list of movies, and I can start typing, and it'll filter based on what I'm typing. And I can arrow down, and I can hit return to select an element, to select a value. So then I have the Dark Knight. And then what'll happen if I tap? Any guesses?
It's the X.
Not.
That's really helpful.
Not, and that's intentional. That's actually intentional. You can I think I can command backspace. That'll clear it. Also, if I do, so I can backspace this way. If I command backspace, it clears it. I can also command A, select all, backspace. So there's some different nuances of how this control works. And if you look at another component library that has an autocomplete, it might work a little differently. That X might be tabbable. When I was working on one, we didn't make it tabbable. And it was like a toss-up, should it be tabbable? We don't know. We got to think about that. And there's sometimes not a clear way to do this. And then you might be thinking, well, is there some type of specification, or are there recommendations? There are, but they don't speak to everything. And they can't speak to everything. A combo box that is maybe it's the search box in YouTube versus the search box for Google versus a filter in your form. They have different needs. They have different use cases. And they might seem very similar, but there's different nuances that you get into where you might want it to work a little differently. You might want to optimize you want to be able to tab quickly through it. And you don't want 5 different tab stops in one control. You only want one. So there's different things to consider like that. But so from here, let's look at how this is built. Because this is definitely a lot more than a select. I'm going to inspect this, and then I'm going to show a diagram. But let me inspect this first. One thing I have not loved about using DevTools, and this applies to any browser, it's not just Chrome, is it can sometimes be hard to see exactly what I want in this tree that's right there. So I inspected this thing, and I got an input. Cool. All right, what do I see here? If I go up the tree, scanning around here, and by the way, this is regular old soft web development. It's how do I build this? I'm just going to go inspect how somebody else built it and see what they did and see if that makes sense. So I've got this input. There's a div here, and there's a div wrapping the whole thing. Okay. Oh, here's the buttons that are siblings to the, actually, they're not siblings to the input. They're siblings to a div wrapping the input. Remember that tab index bit? Tab index -1. They intentionally set it to not have a tab stop there. That was a decision by the developers, designers, maybe an accessibility specialist saying, hey, we shouldn't default it. And that's not to say you can't make it tabbable. And I haven't tried or looked at their docs, but I think Chakra UI is it has a compound component API. So usually you have direct access to these elements. And so often you can like override an attribute and say, no, it shouldn't have this, or it should be tab index equals 0, probably. It's a good way to override this from -1 to be back in the tab order. All right, what else can we look at here? Oh, what happens when we expand it? So I click this with the mouse because I can't actually tab to it. I can also, if I don't do that, if I go down, that'll trigger it as well. I wasn't sure when to say this, but there's a difference between tab order and keyboard navigation. Tab order is just like, yeah, when you tab, what happens? But here's an example of, well, how do you access the elements within? Tabbing will go to another field. It's a down arrow. And then how do you select it? Maybe you hit, where am I? So here. Oh, there it is. Cool. Oh, it's being a little weird right now. I'm not sure if it's because I have DevTools open, but sorry, I'm getting a little confused. So that open it. There we go. Cool. So I can hit return. I've selected a different element. Okay. What else could I point out here? All right. So some other things. We've got this role here. We've set it to be Combobox. So this input is not a select. It doesn't have that default role. And for a screen reader, such as for assistive technology to understand that this input is tied to something else, Combobox is a combination of 2 or more things, really. It's got this input, and then it's got an associated list of elements. It needs that rule actually set on it. There's a couple other things I'll point out. ARIA expanded is important. That's indicating whether it's open or not. So right now it's not, and if I open it, it's now true. So that's important. That's going to cue the screen reader to understand that things have been opened and there's a list to read off. There's a couple other interesting ones. Oh, there's 2 right here. First one is ARIA controls. There's another one called ARIA owns. I can't explain the difference. I will look up every single time which one am I supposed to be using. But ARIA controls is pointing to an ID, a generated ID dash list box. So there's a list box element somewhere else in the DOM. I actually don't see it right here, but it's somewhere else that this is connected. And so the screen reader can see that from the ARIA controls that, oh, it's connected to this list box, and then it can look that up in the DOM, and then it can say, oh, there's 100 items here, or this is the active item, or this is where you are in that list. There's also active descendant. And this is pointing to which of those options in that list is actually active. So that's pointing to, I think that's corresponding to, let's see here. That is corresponding to where my focus is in the list. So if it's on the Dark Knight, that's corresponding to option 3. I go up, goes up to option 2. Where's the value? Because I've got the Godfather here. It's still set as this value. So that's going to stay static as I arrow up and down because the value isn't changing. But then if I select something else, the value will then change over to the Dark Knight. Where is the list box? Let's see if we can find that. Way down, yeah, because it's a pop-up, it's a dialogue. Quick note, if you ever work with pop-ups or dialogues in your library, just look up floating UI. It used to be called Popper.js. It's now called floating UI. A lot of,
Change it.
I don't know, version 2 or something. Popper.js is now called floating UI.
You said also UI.
Oh, sorry, let me look it up. Floating UI. This one. Floating UI. So if you need it, use this. I've seen a number of component libraries just use this. Handles all the where things should go. It's just good to know that that exists.
Like the logo.
I know, right? It's fun. So back to this. Let's see if we can find it. So I'll just say you can't find it unless you set a DOM breakpoint. Because if I try to, I think we can find it here in the tree. But as soon as I click on the thing where it was living, it goes away. So let me do this. I need to set a, what's the right way to set it? I'll just go up to body.
Yeah, that's usually how I do it.
Yeah. So you need to break on subtree modifications. So as soon as something changes in the DOM, basically, it's going to hit a breakpoint and it's going to lock things so they don't go away. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to click this. And I think I pushed play. Yep, cool. And then there it is in the DOM. Let's see if we can find it. So this is a common technique. It'll often throw at the end of the body. There's a roll tooltip on here. I've seen different things for that. That's not too important, but inside there, we've got a UL. And that has a role of list box. There's that ID we saw before for the generated thing dash list box. Oh, there's that ARIA labeled by pointing to the label. Class doesn't matter, that's just styling. If we expand that, we've got a bunch of LIs. Let's try to make this as big as possible. All right, so we got a bunch of LIs. Tab index is -1. They're not tab stops. We're able to arrow down through that. How are we able to arrow down through that? Any guesses?
Keyboard listener?
Huh?
Keyboard listener?
Keyboard listener. Yeah, there's events. We're listening for keyboard shortcuts. So stepping back, if we're using a select, you don't need to worry about keyboard shortcuts. You don't need to worry about setting roles and tab indexes. And that's where, if you've ever heard the idea that don't use ARIA unless you have to, it's because really, if you're doing that, you're saying, I'm not going to use the native elements. I'm going to do all this myself. There's a really nice little doc here. Let me see if I can find where I put it. Over here. Sorry, I love how they said it somewhere. There's a page. I can't remember how I got to the page. I'm just going to find the page in my tabs. There it is. It's the README first. ARIA authoring practices guide. No ARIA is better than bad ARIA. And I wanted to find it because it says it better than I could say it, or I could remember to say it. No ARIA is better than bad ARIA, because if you have ARIA, you have the tools to implement all these things that the default elements do for you, but you gotta do them. And that's like principle one: a role is a promise. As soon as you start doing these things, you're promising, I'm gonna do this right. And if you don't do it right, you're gonna have a bad time. And I wouldn't say you can't not. I wouldn't say it's hard to do it right, but you have to just make sure you're thoughtful about it. You're taking on some responsibility. With great power comes great responsibility. You got to get it right. The other principle here is ARIA can both cloak and enhance. It can help you, and it can also you can use it to enhance things, and it also hides default behaviors. So creating both power and danger. So there's some really good, by the way, these docs on W3.org for Web Accessibility Initiative, for ARIA Authoring Practices Guide are really good. Since I'm here, I'm going to go to the APG home. There are these patterns. I've consulted 2 documents a lot, and they're not MDN. I love MDN. I go to MDN a lot, but there's 2 documents I consult a ton when I'm working on custom controls, custom UI components. One is these patterns here. They go into detail about things like accordions, where you have something you expand and collapse, and alerts and toasts and buttons, and surprise, surprise, combo boxes here. I spent a bunch of time here reading through this. And this is great because it's talking about the pattern. It's talking about how things should work. It's talking about things you need to think about. Yeah, so this is really good. The other one, it's actually the actual spec. The accessible rich internet applications, that's ARIA. The specification, it's currently on 1.2. There's a draft for 1.3, which is what I'm on right now. There's actually a link to the latest recommendation here. You can go to that. So that was June this year. Something I wasn't sure how to describe this, but I'll just say with each version, there's 1.1 and there's 1.2. I found different cases where I've talked to accessibility specialists, and they will tell me, yeah, so 1.1 did this wrong, and 1.2 is going to fix that. They tried to make it better in 1.1, and then it was a step backwards in some way. There's something they didn't consider. There's something missed. And it's also the case with 1.2 going to 1.3. There's some things they're fixing in 1.3, I think for Combobox. I can't remember exactly what. if you go back, I don't know, 15 years when we had 5 different browsers to support, and the specification wasn't quite there, and people were trying different things. It was like the Wild West. How do you do this? There's no rules. Anything goes. Try to make it work. I want to say that it's still kind of like that when it comes to the assistive technologies and the specifications. And it's not that anyone's doing a bad job. It's just there's a lot to figure out. It's even more. There's even more to consider than just what we're used to at the surface level of HTML and CSS. So it's evolving, is what I want to say, and it continues to get better. All right, from here, let's go back to this guy, to our autocomplete here. Let's see. Let me turn the screen reader back on and show you what that looks like to interact with this. So I'm gonna hit my power button 3 times. Go. I can enable a number of things. So just need voiceover.
Chrome, React Autocomplete Hook, Base UI, Memory Usage 190 MB, Google Chrome, Window, List Box Pop-up, Menu Pop-up Combo Box, has keyboard focus. You are currently on a menu pop-up combo box. Type text or, to display a list of choices, press Control, Option, Space.
I just want to point out, it's telling us where we are. We're in a menu pop-up combo box. I can type text. Let me do that.
D, expanded, list box 43 items, completion selected. A, K.
Arrow down.
The Dark Knight not selected, completion selected. You are currently on a text element, inside of a list box. The Dark Knight Rises not selected, completion selected. You are currently on a text element, inside of a list box.
I'm going to hit return and select that element.
Collapsed, completion selected. You are currently on a menu pop-up combo box. Type text or, to display a list of choices, press Control, Option, Space. Authentication. Login, enter password. Window. Chrome. React Autocomplete Hook. Base voiceover off.
Like the X. So what I just did, I want to encourage you to do just different points when you're already developing. If you're not being asked to implement accessibility or do things with a screen reader, but if you're ever working in a rich control or a control that you're doing anything with and you're curious, like just be curious for 5 minutes a week and go over and look at the accessibility tree, look at the role, look at the ID, look at any of the ARIA tags on something, look at the course, the nearby DOM elements, and just pay attention. That's basically what I have been doing for the last, I worked in design systems for 3 years, and I started to do that and just paid more attention to these things. And then one day I woke up, I'm like, oh, this isn't a mystery. This isn't like all these different tags. I don't know how they work. I see how they connect. And I still have to look up MDN and look up the spec and see how things connect and exactly what do I need here. But that's a much more productive conversation that I can actually have than a PM saying, oh, keyboard navigation doesn't work. How long is it going to take to implement? And I really don't know. That's all I had like really thought out here. I want to see if people had questions, if we want to poke around at this, or if you want to share any experiences you've had. Yeah, what do you got?
I know you said it a million times, but what was that? What was that you were using to do the text chat thing?
Oh, this was VoiceOver on Mac. Do you use a Mac?
On Mac, okay.
Yeah, so VoiceOver comes with Mac. I forget what it's called on Windows. Windows has one. There's also like JAWS and NVDA, those new licenses, but you like VoiceOver comes with Mac. So it's if you like pull up.
Is it like for blind people or something? Or?
Yeah, it's a screen reader. Yeah, it's for people.
It's called Narrator.
Huh?
Narrator
on
Windows.
Windows.
Enter.
Yeah.
We'll turn on.
Yeah, give it a shot. And like I just realized like I'm at the level now where I should turn off the make it less verbose. And quick aside there, I've had people say, like developers trying to implement a screen reader experience that aren't very accustomed to it, say, actually tell people on the component library team, hey, it doesn't read these things. And we'll very quickly discover it's because things are configured a certain way and their expectations might not match what what is actually happening. I didn't go into the settings, but there's like every single thing it was reading off is configurable. I could configure, don't tell me this thing, or tell me this differently, or tell me in fewer words, or tell me in more words. And then each screen reader is a little bit different. So there's a lot of permutations. Like forget browser versions and browsers. Like it's so wild, dude, when it comes to screen readers and the different settings, and also how they interact with different browsers. Like VoiceOver with Safari versus Chrome is different.
I've just never seen that.
Yeah.
E6.
No.
It's okay. Polyfill everything. Yeah, let's not go back to IE6.
What do you think about using like accessibility services? Like there are companies that, you know, you can just install their widget on your website and the user can interact with it.
Yeah.
Versus doing everything custom, because this seems like it's going to take a long time for each.
Yeah. The question was like using accessibility services. What do we think about that? And there's like tools you can just install on the page by jQuery, and it will just like add things. The tools are very controversial, as in problematic. It's like going back to that other page, like it's a cloak and dagger, and there's a lot of danger here to get this wrong. And those tools are just working on some basic heuristics to add certain things, and it's easy to add the wrong things and just make things unusable. So I've talked to accessibility specialists. So people who were colleagues, and they've said, yeah, these tools can make certain pages unusable, whereas before they weren't great, but they were somewhat usable, and it made it like impossible to use. That's not to say it won't be better in a few years. I don't know, but when you say accessibility services, my first thought is people who specialize in this, who have this expertise, who I can learn from. And I've had the good fortune of working at a bigger company. I don't do this anymore, but I worked at a big company where we had teams of people that knew this stuff. People who needed to use a screen reader, who knew screen readers really well. And people who are really good developers who could talk to me about, like, here's what you need to do. Some of these people, they can just look at the DOM structure for something I built, not even pull up a screen reader and say, oh yeah, you need these things. And if you do what I said, like pay attention, be curious for a few minutes each week, poke around, you'd be surprised. You'll start to pick up these different things that should be present. Actually, let me give you a quick example. I was doing just some quick research, like what is the state of information out there? And I went on YouTube, because I do a lot of YouTube. I like learn a lot that way. And I was like, let me look up Dropdown and React. What comes up? And let me see where I put it. Localhost. Is this one? Yeah. Okay. So I'm not gonna name the channel, but I'll just say they have millions of followers, and this video had 700,000 views. And it's basically this Dropdowns. This isn't a Combobox. This is just a menu. And I'm going to show you the DOM. And so there's the nav for the whole header. And then there's this UL. These are all LIs. Okay. And then this LI has a hyperlink. And there's an SVG inside of it. And then there's another div associated for this pop-up. And inside that, we've got a div with a class menu. And then a bunch of links just as children of that. Does anyone have any thoughts on what this may or may not do?
Links always represent a state transition for routing. Not always, but it could be, yeah. I wouldn't use links here.
Yeah, should be a link or a button. I don't know. I'll say I was actually poking around earlier. I was looking at this thing. I was like, what do they do on this website? And I started inspecting it. Oh, this thing's a button. Okay. I wasn't sure what to expect. That actually surprised me. Like, oh, it's a button. It's not a link. When I thought about it, I'm like, oh yeah, this thing is opening. It's opening content below it. So it's not going anywhere. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. It's a button. All right, let me look inside this div. Is it this one? Yeah, this is the div. There's a button here. There's a UL here for all these links. These are LIs. There's a role of list on the UL. Actually, I'm not even sure if that's necessary, but it's there. Mm-hmm. And then inside there are actual links to go different places. Okay. let's look at the accessibility tree for this. Let's look at it on the hyperlink. So if I'm on the hyperlink and I pull up over on the right, accessibility. All right, so I've got a link inside of a list item, inside of a list. And it's actually a nested list, and that's okay. Like you can have nested lists, all that stuff. All right, so I've got these things in the tree. What does the other thing I looked at look like? Go back to it. Where was it? The keyboard shortcut for looking at the tab is unmuting. So it's on my other, it's on this one. Sorry, this is me every day. I have too many things open. It's on
Funny because it's true.
Oh, I'm not the only one?
No.
Okay, here it is.
Like,
You should try harder. That's like, you're slacking at my tabs. Come on. I've even got tab groups with that many in there.
So on the surface, it actually doesn't look too bad. There's a link inside of a generic, inside of a list item, inside of a list. I'll just say I tested this with a screen reader. It was confusing. So there was no intentionality here to do some things. Like one of these things was probably a button. The expand should have been a button, as Jeff suggested, for the down arrow. This should have been one of these should have been probably this div should have been a UL or added the role list. And then you'd have to add list item as a role to the anchor tags, but the browser figured it out. The browser still tries to figure things out. But things definitely went off the rails with a screen reader. And that might have been because even though I see these things in the accessibility tree, I don't know, I actually don't know if the screen reader looks at the accessibility tree or has an API for that, or if it looks at the DOM or what. Things definitely went off the rails a little bit. And I looked at a bunch of different examples, not just this one, and I quickly saw that things were implemented in a way that were obtuse. They weren't relying on things I was used to seeing. And I was used to seeing things as I started to pay attention. So again, just pay attention, look around at these different things. Look at how, I mean, obviously you might just inspect in the wild and see something. You could go about two ways. You could find a resource like, oh, they've probably done it well. And look at how MUI did this. How did they build this component? You'll start to see good things. And then you'll randomly come across something like, this doesn't work for me. I can't keyboard navigate this. Inspect it. What's going on? Why might this not be working? Hopefully it's not code you wrote. Maybe it is. I've definitely, like that jQuery plugin was definitely not keyboard accessible. It definitely didn't work with a screen reader. And the funny thing is, like, going back to it, I probably in 15 minutes could totally make it work. It's not too much. What other questions or thoughts or curiosities?
What do you think about WASM and how that's going to affect accessibility?
Ooh, WASM. How is WASM going to affect accessibility?
I see it as a disaster myself.
Oh yeah, I don't know, man. I really don't know. I gotta think there's because I know like Figma is essentially it's written in C and it's in the browser and it's basically loading a desktop application through WASM. And I gotta think that that's accessible in some way. So I don't know. I gotta say that I gotta guess that it's not necessarily bad, but like that's just another thing to think about.
Another party pooper whenever people.
Yeah,
I'm like, well, what about accessibility?
Yeah, it's another area where you might not understand. Here's the funny thing: it might be better in some applications. It might be better because they're using what was traditionally a desktop application, which wasn't avoid. Just because we have web doesn't mean the web's the only thing that has accessibility and implements it. So desktop applications can also have that. So I don't know what that looks like, but that's an unknown that another skill area that I'd have to skill up on to understand if I was building on that. So I don't know. Yeah.
How much do you try to make it accessible? Like how accessible are you trying to make these components?
Yeah. How much do I try to make it accessible and how accessible do I try to make it? There's like, like there's situations I've been in where we spend extra time to enhance the screen reader experience, where we could have done what was just best practice. It would have been fine, but we cared very much. Like I worked on a virtual assistant, the whole idea of this virtual assistant was to make it so you don't have to click through 5 different screens, wait for page loads and post backs to do a task. You just want to say, hey, I want to do this, and it would do it for you. So in that case, the experience was intended to be as streamlined as possible. And for a sighted user, able to see this little floaty thing and click it and get the speech bubble thing and type something, natural language, and have it just work, it was pretty straightforward. But for a screen reader to do those things, it needed some extra effort to bring it to parity with what a sighted user would experience. So that's usually not the case. But so I want to say there may be cases where you are going to be intentional, where you're going to invest extra effort to make something a good experience for somebody using a screen reader. And that'll be more dev time. And I wouldn't say like months, but it could be a week or two on certain things to make it really work, to make it really seamless, to test it out yourself, to find a specialist, to find somebody, to find a customer maybe, and have them tell you what could be better about it or what they struggle with it. So that's possible, but it's not usually the case. Usually we're trying to just make sure we can keyboard navigate through it and it's working in a predictable way. And pull up a screen reader once in a while and see if you can use the thing you're working on and see what it sounds like. Is it really confusing? Is there something, is it lost? I could tell when I tested this thing, it was totally missing what was happening. So
in certain instances, accessibility is required by law.
Yeah, I didn't say that. Yeah. Certain instances, accessibility is required by law.
So like you have to do it.
Yeah, like if it's, I think if it's like a government website, for example, or if it's, I know I worked somewhere where it was required, but I don't even remember if it was by law. And really, it shouldn't matter if it's required by law. Like I think we're getting closer and closer to a point where these things. What was it? Was it Domino's? What was I think it was the pizza ordering or a food ordering service or website that got sued because
Taylor Swift got sued. Her website wasn't accessible.
Yeah,
she got sued.
Yeah, but yeah, good example. Yeah. But there was a consumer website that had a lawsuit, and it wasn't like they broke a law. It was like they just got sued because they didn't provide equal access to something. I think it was something funny like the coupon. I think it was like the coupon system didn't quite work, wasn't accessible, so you couldn't get a discount. And it was like you could order pizza, but you couldn't apply like 10% off or whatever, something like that. That's not equal. If that it's available to me, but it's not available to somebody else.
They win.
Yeah, I think they won in the fact that, well, whoever it was, I don't know who it was. I don't remember who it was. I don't want to say the wrong company, but they fixed it. And that's really the win, right? And lawsuits end up that way. You sue somebody, you sue a company, you say, hey, this is wrong. They go and fix it. And then it's like, cool. That's basically what happens. A lot of cases. There's no harm intended. It's like, please fix this. If they don't fix it, yeah, pay out. But they usually just go and fix it, and that's the whole purpose. It's not to like be frivolous or anything like that. Yeah, so it's like the baseline for us is just build stuff that works for us or most people, but it's with a little bit of effort. Like you can understand these things, try a little bit more, like just be a little bit curious. And you'll start to see like, oh, wow, this probably is not ideal. And I don't know exactly what it should be. Then I'll go look at another website like the W3.org website. And, oh, they have these things. What if I add these things? What is it like on a screen reader before and after? You see pretty quickly without being an expert. The documentation's there, looking at those patterns like I showed you. This is the spec. Looking through the standards here. This isn't the pattern site, but I've gone through these things and found things, found information that I've needed. I can't remember. I think it was in the patterns website. Actually has examples. I meant to show you that. So let me show one more thing about that. It was here. No, here. Okay, view patterns. Let me go to Combobox. Cool. So they have examples. This example section is really great because let's go to an editable combo box with list autocomplete. We'll go to that. There's a whole page on this one example. Like each of these examples had their own pages talking about different nuances. And this is great. So I can open this in a code pen, or I can just like click it, interact with it. This is something I found myself doing, is going to these examples and then like tabbing through it, arrowing through it. What is the keyboard navigation? Like, what should it be? Like, this isn't spec, but it's kind of a reference implementation and example. And then I would also find myself inspecting the source and looking at how it's built. That's inside of an SVG, but there's a button and input, and we'll fix this. So I'll find myself like looking at, all right, how do they do the DOM? And quick pro tip, like control click something and copy the element or copy the outer HTML, like copy the whole thing. Let me just do that. I copied outer HTML. You go over to VS Code. Let me go over to this window. I did it earlier. I just pasted some HTML. I'm just going to paste what I pulled out. Like paste that in the editor. Just look at it, and you can see what was happening there. I mean, sometimes like I'll even find myself pulling up MUI or Chakra, just going to their source code, going on GitHub or pulling down the repo and like looking at how they built it. The thing with React, I mean, I didn't talk much about React, but like it doesn't matter. Thing about React though is like there's like componentization. You have to look at a bunch of places. Sometimes it's easier just to look at the DOM output. What do? Making that React isn't that hard. There's nothing special about React making this any harder or easier, by the way. The same talk applies to Vue or Svelte or whatever comes next.
And make sure you turn on your option to view the shadow group.
Yeah, I haven't tried that. How do you do that?
Setting is.
Oh, it's, yeah, like, I don't know if I could do anything here, but yeah.
I think it's in the regular settings, but
Regular settings. But exactly what you said, like, what does the shadow DOM look like for this? And like, be curious and just poke around. I don't even know. I haven't gone there. Yeah. So right attitude. I'll wrap it up here. These are really good questions, really good ideas. See a lot of nodding heads. Yeah, we can be a lot better at this. Like, just be curious, poke around. And like, the funny thing is, if you spend a couple hours on this, you're going to be ahead of, this is unfortunate to say, but you're going to be ahead of most web developers that have never spent any time on it. Just a little bit of intentionality, you're going to have a much sharper skill on this. You spend a few hours on it, you know, and you get to work on a single component. You're where you want to be. And then anytime you work on something, you know, you're able to much more easily say, oh, like, we can make this tabbable or tab accept, like we can fix the keyboard navigation in a couple hours, just going through it, making sure it works, and not have it be unknown. So that's all I got. Thank you.
What percentage of people do you think use, or other stats on like who use the default voiceover, default screen readers?
Oh gosh,
like,
yeah. Okay, so there are stats on, I can't remember if it's on W3.org, but I know there's statistics out there on usage, like what is most common and what should you target. Like Google it and see what comes up. I know there's some statistics on that, because that is a great question. Like, what should you start with? What's a good one to target? Because there's no like, I asked the question like, what should I focus on, like as a starting point? And I mean, it would just say like, what do you have on your system? What's easy to do? You know, you have a Mac, you have VoiceOver, just go do that. You're already way ahead of the game, solving for 80% of cases. And there's like definitely like nuances of the experience. Like NVDA with this browser is going to be different. JAWS on Windows with Edge is going to be different. Usually it's not an issue, but every now and then we'll have, I would see a reported issue that was specific to one combination. But there are statistics out there to look up what matters the most, and definitely pay attention to your own browser statistics. I mean, I'd say pay attention to your own browser statistics, but I immediately take that back, because your browser statistics aren't going to necessarily be indicative of who's using a screen reader. And I don't think that shows up in any of the data sent over on requests. So
It is not in the user agent.
it's on the user agent. Cool. We talk more after this.
All right, well, that's it for the video. Thank you, folks, being online. He doesn't have slides to share, so poke him on Discord if you have questions. Hit me up on Discord if you have any questions about anything. I will put up a poll to see who is interested in doing a December meetup. I'm ambivalent. I'm happy to be here and host, but if everyone wants the holiday off, so be it. I just have to let Brandon know so he doesn't stay at work one day too late. Speaking of which, doors close at 7:30, so we have to be packed up and out by then because he wants to go home. And yeah, anyway, thank you. I'm stopping the recording.